Welcome to the Modern Husbands podcast, where any combination of Dr. Bruce Ross, Christian Sherrill, and Brian Page host national experts who share winning ideas to manage money and the home as a team. Today we welcome Julia Menez, founder of Geo Breeze Travel. We discuss the world of points and rewards travel. She shares how points and miles can be used to save money on flights and hotels, how to be strategic with credit cards and points, and shares success stories of clients who have planned dream vacations using her strategies. Enjoy the show. Julia, we are thrilled to have you on our podcast today. Thanks for joining us.
Thank you for having me. I'm so excited to be here.
So I want to start with what your favorite place in the world to travel to with your partner is.
My favorite place that we've been is Singapore because I think it's the perfect combination of good logistics and good food. I'm a huge fan of both. We've been to a lot of places like Morocco, which has fantastic food. Logistics are a little iffy sometimes. And we've been to places like Denmark, where the logistics and public transit were great. Food was not my favorite. So Singapore is kind of my favorite intersection of those two things, which I think really make a vacation for me and my husband.
How long of a flight is it from the West Coast to Singapore?
About 12 hours, probably.
Okay. Now, can you tell us about the inspiration behind your company, Geo Breeze Travel?
Sure. So during the pandemic, I was working from home and just very lonely and was already into points and miles just as kind of a hobby. So I was reaching out to a lot of different people on Instagram and on the internet being like, hey, since we're all stuck at home, do you want to just hang out on Zoom and talk about points and miles? And they were like, who are you? And no, I don't want to do that. And so I was like, oh, well, what if I record our conversations and release it to thousands of people on the internet? To which they were like, oh, are you starting a points podcast? Because I want to be featured. And I didn't even have much of a following at this point. But I was like, yes, I'm starting a points podcast. Would you like to be featured? And so I bamboozled about 20 different people to each hang out with me for an hour to tell me all of their secrets about how they were earning points and getting great redemptions. And eventually I was like, I have to release this if I'm going to continue this whole thing of like bamboozling people into being my friends online. So that is how the podcast got started, is I would just like have these conversations, release them on the internet of like, how are you earning these points? How did you get to go to France like this? And eventually people listened to the podcast and they were like, hey, instead of me listening to your podcast every week, can I just like pay you to do this for me? I don't have time to listen all the time, but can I just like pay you some money and you find the flights for me? So this was not supposed to be income yielding. I was just very bored and lonely during the pandemic, but here we are.
That's a great story. And I got to say that not everyone really understands, what points and rewards and everything associated with like the different ways to travel other than just straight up cash. So kind of like points and rewards travel. Let's do a points and rewards travel 101 here. So for our listeners who are new to the concept, could you explain what points and miles travel is and how it works?
Sure. So airlines, hotels, credit card companies, they all have different loyalty programs where by interacting with their programs, either by flying, staying with hotels, spending money on their co-branded credit cards, you can earn points that you can redeem for those flights or hotels or other things later. And this is just how a lot of different programs will have loyalty built out so that you keep coming back and you become a reoccurring customer. And those points and miles that they give you, if you know how to use them, can be very, very lucrative when it comes to travel.
Can you give me one example of lucrative? What do you mean by that?
Sure. So imagine that you have 100,000 points.
Okay.
Most of the time, if you're just cashing them out or using them on Amazon, you're getting about 1 cent per point. So 100,000 points, you can get $1,000 of stuff on Amazon or $1,000 cash back, which is not bad at all. But for the same 100,000 points, you could maybe fly round trip in business class to Europe. And if you were to just pay for that ticket, out of pocket, that ticket would cost a lot more than $1,000. So you're effectively getting maybe $3 or $4 or $5,000 depending on the flight, a lot more value out of that 100,000 points instead of just cashing it out and buying stuff on Amazon or cashing it out and putting it in your bank account.
So that leads me to wondering, how do you travel like people on social media?
Yeah, so a lot of people on social media earn points in different ways. One thing to mention is a lot of us have businesses, so we are eligible for business cards, and those have big sign up bonus. That's how you can earn a lot of points. Most people think, oh, I don't have a whole internet business. I can't get business cards. But really, if you sell something on Facebook Marketplace once in a while, or you're tutoring somebody in math and they're paying you money, you can get business cards. It's not that hard. But there's definitely a gap between Instagram versus reality and of everything that's going on, because it seems like a lot of people who are in the points world are constantly traveling in style with their whole family
Mhm.
all over the world all the time. So let's break down what's actually going on. Most people, myself included, are not constantly traveling. I'm recording this from my apartment in Las Vegas. My husband and I take about 3 to 4 big trips per year, big meaning it's in business class over an ocean. And while we're doing maybe 3 or 4 of those trips, so we are traveling for 3 to 6 weeks out of the year, which is quite a bit,
Mhm.
we're not constantly traveling. We're not every other week traveling. Any good influencer knows that you're supposed to reuse content. So if I take one trip over to Asia, you might be seeing content from that trip dripped out over many weeks, maybe months, maybe years, with just like reusing photos or video clips or something. And because the algorithm really likes for us to repost stuff or to just post content every day, honestly, we do have to reuse a lot of footage and a lot of photos. So just because you're seeing someone constantly post about traveling does not mean that they are constantly traveling. So that's one thing to keep in mind, is just the
Okay.
frequency of how often we're doing this. Another thing to keep in mind is how we're earning this many points, and like, are we really saving $100,000? Most people on the internet are like, you can travel for free. It's not really free. It's very heavily discounted. So I'll probably get about $100,000 of travel per year for about 90% off by using points and miles, different ways.
Um,
Um,
90% off. I mean, that is an impressive discount. I mean, that's unbelievable.
Yeah, it takes a lot of points to do what I do at the magnitude that we do. And a lot of people are like, we just have to focus on recreating all these trips. But most people don't need to be taking that many trips. You don't need to string together as many countries as I do in a particular trip. If you just go to Italy instead of Italy plus France plus Switzerland all in one trip, that's completely fine. So that's something to note as well, is that the itineraries that a lot of Instagram influencers do are not always the most realistic. We're optimizing for like, what's the best deal that I can always get. Maybe it's a little bit more inconvenient of a route, but hey, it makes a better story for social media. Whereas if you're
Mm.
dragging around 3 kids in tow on vacation, you probably want to maximize more so for convenience instead of what's going to make the coolest story for you to talk about on a non-existent YouTube channel.
Yeah, and as you're speaking, I love the fact that you're being totally transparent, because I see, social media influencers, particularly in the financial space, who are, it's almost like an illusion. They make it feel like that you can live a certain way. You just don't know how to. So just follow them, and they have everything figured out. But what you're saying is, no, it's really not that simple. Like, that's blown out of proportion. But at the same time, what I love hearing is that you can figure out creative ways to heavily discount your travel. And the first thing that comes to mind is, researching business cards that I'm going to be eligible for because I have my own business. But you're also speaking to like everyday people with side hustles who, maybe they're tutoring, or maybe they're an Uber driver, or whatever it may be. and they might be eligible for the types of travel in smaller doses based on that. Is there anything remaining when you think of like, how is it that people on social media travel? Like, what is it about that that causes you to think, I need to straighten some of this out with the listeners?
Yeah, something that a lot of people also assume is that everybody who gets to travel like this is our full-time gig. It is my full-time gig. I used to be an actuary, but the vast majority of influencers don't make as much money as you would expect online. We do get affiliate money from when people use our credit card. Some of us get money from doing private consulting and coaching and things like that, ad revenue on blogs or podcasts. But I think it's also a little blown out of proportion, not just with the points industry, but with all influencer industries, just how lucrative those can really be. I always say you can make so much more money and so many more points just from having a business that is really boring and makes six figures a year with just like, if you were running a landscaping business and mowing lawns and making $80,000 to $100,000 a year, but having a lot of expenses that you could put on cards, you would probably be better off than most people who are trying to get people to use their links online and other things like that. And I also always recommend to people put real money before fake points money, because so many people do so many different mental gymnastics to open new cards and to get the best redemptions. But really, if that life is fueled by debt, or you're doing that at the expense of you're spending so much time focusing on points and miles that you're missing a promotion, or you're missing going for a new job, or you're just missing out on a lot of other things like starting an investment account that would yield much, much better returns in the future. I know it's not nearly as grammable to do those boring things, but I did all of the financial independence stuff before getting into points and miles. And if you're already financially independent, I don't know if this is a surprise to anyone, but it is much easier to earn points and miles if you already have money. If you're trying to like squeeze points and miles out of $20,000 of income per year or less than that, if you're an Instagram influencer and just doing this as a side hustle, it can be really tough. So I hope that nobody's surprised if I'm like, everything is easier, especially in World of Points and Miles, if you're already kind of rich. But I think it has to be said because there's so many people who base their marketing off of, you can travel like this, even if you have like student loans and no money and everything. And I don't know if that's the most responsible message to send to our audience.
As a Modern Husbands podcast listener, you recognize the importance of evidence-based advice from leading national experts for your marriage. That's why we know you will love our marriage toolkit. Nearly 50 national experts came together to provide bite-sized advice to manage the toughest topics couples face in managing money in the home as a team. Go to modernhusbands.com for your free preview of our marriage toolkit to start, strengthen, or rebuild your marriage. Once again, that's modernhusbands.com to sign up for your free preview of our marriage toolkit. Now back to the show. You didn't know this before, but when I researched your background, I was like, okay, I'm sold, because you're an actuary. By trade, you're an actuary. So for our listeners who don't know what an actuary is, can you explain it kind of in lay terms?
There are different kinds of actuaries. I was a pricing actuary, so deep math models to figure out how much to charge for different insurance products is what I did.
So you are a numbers genius.
Not genius.
You played with numbers all day long professionally for the insurance industry. Who better to have a travel company than somebody who just does nothing but numbers? You probably love Excel spreadsheets, don't you?
I do. I really like spreadsheets. I appreciate your comments. Oftentimes I'm just like, man, I would just connect with so many more people if I had a writing background or like an artsy background or could make better graphics or videos on Instagram.
I want to hear from somebody who's got an artsy background when it comes to like figuring out how to squeeze every dollar out of every travel decision I make. I want somebody who's in love with their spreadsheets and is a trained actuary.
It definitely helps for the more analytic side. For the media side of everything, on like YouTube's and everything, my videos are so boring. I'm like, click here, 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 and now, yay, you have 6 cents per point. So I don't feel like I'm the most captivating personality, but I'm good at the analytics and the numbers part of it.
Well, your social media profile is robust, and you obviously have a lot of followers, but the trust was earned from your professional background, and that's why I really wanted to have this conversation with you. Okay, so we're going to have a 60-second challenge. So what that means is I'm going to ask you some questions, and if possible, summarize your responses in 60 seconds or less, and then if needed, we can dive into more detail. Does that sound like a plan?
Sounds like a plan.
Okay. What are some of the biggest misconceptions people have about travel rewards and points?
A lot of people think that their credit score is going to tank. It's not. If you pay off your full credit card bill in full every month on schedule, your credit score will go up.
Perfect. Okay. And boy, you know your way to my heart because I love talking about credit. And there are so many credit scoring myths out there. But that's a whole separate conversation. Okay. 60-second challenge. How can dual career couples benefit from points and rewards travel, especially when managing busy schedules and limited vacation time?
If you have what's called two-player mode, where both of you can open credit cards, you're at an advantage because you can just refer each other to cards. And in addition to getting sign-up bonuses, you're going to get referral bonuses from referring your spouse back and forth to different cards. So you have an advantage there.
Oh, you're just for the frugal of us right now. Like I am trying not to jump out of my chair. I love that tip. We're going to make sure we share that with the world. Okay. So here is one final 60-second challenge question. What are some practical steps couples can take to start accumulating travel points and miles without drastically changing their spending habits?
Work backwards to what you want to do. Don't do what I call shiny card syndrome, where you're just opening a whole bunch of cards because you saw people talk about them on the internet, because people talk about what they're paid to talk about. Instead, figure out what you actually want to do with these points, figure out how much it's going to cost in points, what kind of points you need, and let that determine what cards to open, and then put regular expenses on those cards to make the sign up bonus. Don't just start applying for cards because someone on the internet said it was the best thing to do.
I would love it if you could share a success story from one of your clients who used your points and rewards travel strategies to plan a dream vacation.
Oh, we have a lot of these. So, our client Johnny went on an around the world trip. He had so many different types of points and different buckets, which we don't recommend because points will devalue over time. Inflation hits points just like they hit money.
Oh, that's a
And
good point.
yeah, you don't want to hoard points. People are like, I'll just feel better if I see 2 million points sitting in my United account. Don't do that. Absolutely don't do that, because this year, the flight that you want to Europe, maybe it costs 80,000 points to fly it with the airline that you want. But then next year, that exact same flight, they could be charging 90,000 points for it. So your points don't earn interest sitting there, but inflation does hit them. So for everybody, again, it's a psychological thing where they're like, oh, but like I should save this much. People who are good at points and miles generally have a good personal finance background, a solid foundation, but the same skills don't exactly apply. You can't just be like, I'm such a good saver, very frugal with points, never going to spend them. Let's just watch that balance go up. Yeah, that works well when you're working with index funds, but not points balances, because the inflation will hit faster. You're not earning interest on those points. Spend them. They are meant to be spent. Saying all that, our client had lots of points in lots of different accounts. So we're like, let's just string all of these together. He wanted to do a very memorable around the world trip with his grandson. So they went from Georgia to England to Greece, Dubai, Japan, Maldives was somewhere in there. So they just went all the way around the world. And between all four of them, that was more than $60,000 if we just took like the cash price of every single flight and hotel stay that they did. So if you're working with a lot of different flight segments, and especially a large family, you can save a lot of money. We had another client where she had a family of 4. She also wanted to bring her dad and her brother along for a trip to Europe and wanted all 6 people to fly in business class. So between that and then another South America trip that they did, and I think some local domestic ones we helped them with as well, they got more than $100,000 of savings if we just took the sticker price of everything.
Okay, so if you're listening, you're probably wondering, okay, how do I get a hold of Julia? Where can I learn more? Because I could use her advice. So Julia, would you mind sharing a little bit more about Geo Breeze Travel and where people can learn more?
Yeah, if you want to watch short form content, I mostly hang out on Instagram at Geo Breeze Travel. We also have a YouTube channel where you can view more in-depth tutorials as well as the podcast. I have a website and we have lots of resources there where you can request personalized award search tutorials. You can have a free intro call with us for business owners and individuals who spend more than $100,000 per year on expenses. We'd like to see if we can save you tens of thousands of dollars on your travel as well. So you can book an intro call with us at geobreezetravel.com/intro call, and we'll see what we can do.
And what is one simple and actionable step our listeners can take away from today?
Don't hoard points. If you already have a whole bunch of points and you're like, I'm so cool because I've got 2 million points sitting there, the joy of points is not from sharing a screenshot of how many points you have. It's from turning those points into actual memories, which is very difficult for people who come from like a very frugal background where they're just like, no, I've been conditioned that like good things happen when you delay the marshmallow and when you just hold on to money and you don't spend it all. That will burn you on the side of points. So just keep in mind that points are meant to be spent. Don't hoard your points.
Julia, what a wonderful conversation today. I know that you certainly have helped a lot of our listeners. You've helped me. Thank you.
Anytime. Thank you so much for having me on the show. It's a pleasure to be here.
A special thanks to our guest and, of course, to all of our listeners. Don't forget to click subscribe wherever you download your podcast, give us a rating, and share the Modern Husbands podcast with others. Doing so goes a long way in growing our reach. And join your fellow modern husbands and have links to our podcasts, articles, and other resources to manage money in the home as a team sent to your inbox every 2 weeks by subscribing to our newsletter at modernhusbands.com. Until next time, be well.